Day of September 2015. Yes, we have made it into that magical month everybody's talking about according to the Pope's work schedule. Anyway, more on that in another show, I assure you. But tonight we're going to actually do, for the first time since I've come to American Freedom Radio, a JFK-focused show. Okay, I used to get complaints on the other network, believe it or not, about the fact that I would quite often go to the JFK assassination as subject matter, and, you know, they just didn't appreciate it over there, so we're going to try it over here. Believe it or not, we've actually done 4 other shows on this particular topic. Myself and one of the guests tonight, Carmine Savastano, who is an author of an upcoming book called, and not an author, I should say the author of an upcoming book, excuse me. It is called Two Princes and a King. Okay, what is he talking about? Well, of course, the concept of American royalty that was, you know, sort of part of the zeitgeist, certainly of the 60s, and definitely posthumously after both Kennedys were assassinated, but even after JFK himself was assassinated, the concept of Camelot and all of that, this is where the two princes come from. And who is the king? Well, definitely not Elvis. We are talking about Dr. Martin Luther King, as in these are 3 of the most well-known high-profile assassinations that occurred during a particular time period that, in my estimation, decapitated an entire sort of emotional grid in this country and had worldwide effects. So I do appreciate the subject matter in his book. Of course, there were other people killed during the 60s that were quite pivotal as well, and even into the 70s, but I promise you more on that in other shows. Tonight's focus, believe it or not, though, isn't on Carmine's book or necessarily Neapolis Media Group, which Carmine is part of, so am I, and so is Rob Clark, who will join us in a little bit. He is the host of the Lone Gunman podcast. Okay. But believe it or not, we're going to focus on something that might sound strange coming from a guy who absolutely advocates the idea that, well, there is no choice in the matter. The Kennedy assassination, as in the John F. Kennedy assassination, was absolutely, in my mind, without a doubt, a conspiracy. And, well, there's one official government pronouncement that actually agrees with me and one that doesn't. But anyway, it is a conspiracy, but it does not necessarily mean that every single conspiracy that you have heard about is true. There is a great deal of mythology built into the mythos of the assassination, and that is what we're going to tackle tonight. So actually, American Freedom Radio listeners, you're joining us in Episode 5 of JFK Myths. And Rob Clark has actually officially joined us. But first, as I was saying before, Carmine Savastano, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good, Chuck. How you doing?
Do you think I summed up what the basic idea is here?
Yeah, I think you put a nice summary on it.
Cool. And definitely we're going to discuss actually what we mean by a myth or mythology in a minute. But next thing I want to do is say hi to Rob Clark, who is, like I said before, the host of the Lone Gunman podcast. And don't get turned off by the name like I did. At first, I actually did. I thought that he was going to be one of these guys that wanted to scream every single week or month or whatever all about how Lee Harvey Oswald was absolutely guilty, and all of you people who think otherwise are out of your minds because it was called The Lone Gunman. But after it sank in a little bit and I actually took a look at what Rob was doing, I understood why it is that he did this. And how you doing tonight, Rob?
Good, Chuck. How are you?
All right. And, of course, the Lone Gunman podcast you can catch on Spreaker. I'm sure that's the main site where it's housed at the moment, right?
Yep, and they can also find it on tlgpodcast.com.
I always forget about that because I think I have the Spreaker thing like bookmarked in my browser, so I forget about that. It is at tlgpodcast.com. That's true. So, gentlemen, who wants to start off this discussion and tell us what we mean when we're talking about myths?
Would you like to, Rob? Or I can. It's up to you.
Go ahead, Carmine.
Okay, myths. What we're talking about is, while there are a large variety of sources that you can get the information from on the feasible conspiracy, the Kennedy assassination, there are sources that do not follow the evidence. And unfortunately, it's a lot more than one would expect. Over the years, ideas and stories crop up, and then when people die, oftentimes they're handed to another group of people who were not even connected to the original story, and then the story morphs and transforms according to whoever's in charge of that specific group. Almost like the mythology of the real world, like ancient Greek mythology. It gets elaborated upon and it gets added to, and they try to revamp it so it becomes there's a personal attachment to the modern world rather than just letting it go because there's no evidence for it.
Right, that's exactly like what happens when the Romans, for example, pick up the Greek myths, and they change the names, but all the stories remain the same, and then they add a few extra gods. Oh, gee, what's interesting about that? It does sound exactly like what happened in the JFK assassination research community over the years. Now, why do I say this? Okay. Realistically, depending on which wave you want to count me in, I could be counted as the second wave of researchers after the 25th anniversary because that was in 1988. And realistically, my serious journey on this probably started right after then. So, after the surge of interest after 25 years had passed, there was a resurgence in interest. This is why I think a lot of these stories are resurrected, a lot of poorly done research from the 70s, and in some cases you can't blame them because they didn't have the information that we have today. But there are others that I do believe simply did this, well, gee, how many different motives can you ascribe to it? There was personal gain. There were people that just wanted attention for other projects. There were people that wanted to insert themselves into the storyline over and over and over again. And you would think that 25 years after that 25-year anniversary, we would be looking at a different field. But truthfully, the Internet has actually made it worse. And now you have much more prolific sets of myths, I would say, about the assassination. And it's sad because guys like myself, guys like Carmine, Carmine adheres very seriously to the documentation. This is his starting point for a lot of what he discusses. And this is a reasonably sound way to approach it. And when we're talking about documentation, Carmine, what's like your field of documentation that you would say is part of your baseline in a lot of these cases, just regarding any issue in the case?
Primary evidence. You want substantial primary evidence where you can get it. And a lot of times, almost every case, I'd say, you can get it in some form or another. A legal document, something from an educational collection that can be verified. The problem with a lot of these myths, as we refer to them, is there is an utter lack of primary evidence. You might hear the argument that, well, you can't trust all the official documents because they lie. Well, yes, I agree. We can verify that they lied, but it's with their own documents that we can do it. If everyone leaves a paper trail, and no matter how you try to eradicate a program, nobody ever gets all of it. So if you can find that thread in the evidence itself, and because it's verified, they can't say that it's a lie. They can't say that you fabricated it. It's their own documents.
Right. How do you feel about that, Rob? You think Carmine's methodology is dead on?
I do. And, I agree with it wholeheartedly because it makes it hard for people to argue with you when you can throw a document in their face. Because there's a lot of people on the other side of the argument that don't actually take the time to research that deep. And, it shows in a lot of their work. And, I'm not, my personal, I guess, scale of research is more specialized in speculation using documentation. I'm pretty good at pulling pieces from here, pieces from there, trying to couple them together and figure out kind of what makes the most sense based on, what we do know and can prove.
See, and it's interesting because there's quite a crossover, okay? There's quite a crossover between the two of you when it comes to the documentation. Now, me, I'm a little bit different. I do appreciate the documentation. I use it as a baseline, but I do think to myself quite often that it has been manipulated. Like Carmine said, he agrees. But see, I will go to verify it 2 more times. At least 2 more times before I even begin to accept an assertion in a document. I attempt to interview the persons that are involved in the document, and that means either the individual doing an interview, the person who created the document, the person who is involved in the documentation, whether it be a witness or whether it be someone who is involved in a procedural situation. It doesn't matter. I attempt to interview the individual. I always did. Now, some of those individuals have passed on. We're talking about something from half a century ago, so some people are out of reach nowadays. But I always find it interesting when people, even on our side, which is what I really want to focus on again tonight, on our side of the equation, seem to seize upon statements from witnesses, claim that this is the holy grail of something. And by the way, when I said witnesses, I was holding up air quotes, because a lot of people that claim to be witnesses turn out not to be witnesses of any kind. And that happens over and over again. Now, I know this sounds like a really sort of exasperated, drawn-out look at methodology. But I feel it's necessary to explain that, it's not as though we're just throwing our opinions out there without cause regarding what's wrong with the alleged conspiracy theories here. And remember, I'm a guy who wants to believe the conspiracy theories. I'll even admit on the air right now that the most embarrassing thing that I wanted to believe and for a short time thought was very plausible was the whole French gunman scenario. For people who don't know about that, there was a guy named Steve Rebell some years ago who most famously was exhibited on something called The Men Who Killed Kennedy. Okay? And that was an interesting BBC TV show that has, a lot of interesting characters in it and a lot of bad information in it, although a lot of people still seem to think it is the holy grail of the assassination. Really, it has fallen apart of its own weight over the years. But anyway, this guy came up with this idea that French Connection heroin smugglers were involved in the assassination. Now, this seems like a reasonable conclusion if you think about it, because the CIA and other intelligence groups often employ criminal elements to do things like this. So it seemed plausible from the beginning. But again, it falls apart because realistically there's actually no evidence to back it, outside of the word of somebody who was trying to make a deal, allegedly to one reporter. And I'm telling you right now, that is simply not enough. That's simply not enough to create a plausible case for an argument here even. And that's one of those things I wanted to believe. I got to tell you. And that's about as embarrassing as I can possibly get about the worst thing I ever believed in. And it was for a short time, but nonetheless, I did it. Okay. Now, what do you think? And I'm just going to throw this open because in the second hour, I've got a particular idea in mind for focus. Okay. But I want to hear from Rob first, actually. What do you think is the worst of the worst? Okay. Because we covered a lot of ground in the first 4 programs. But what do you think is the worst of the worst right now? Just top of your stack as far as the worst theory or set of theories, depending on how you look at it, regarding the Kennedy assassination?
Well, that's a good question. There's a lot of them. Judith Baker is pretty near the top of the list, though. And I would put Jim Fetzer and Ralph Sinkay right up there with her at this time.
Now, the only reason why I'm going to let you get away with naming the authors of these theories instead of the theories is because each one of the people that you just mentioned have authored, multiple strains of infection regarding the alleged conspiracy theory here. So you kind of have to boil it down to the authors, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, just Ralph Sinkay, for example, he came on the scene with the whole Oswald in the doorway thing, but he's backed by Jim Fetzer. Now he's trying to say that Mary Mormon didn't take the Mormon photo, and he's going to try to recreate it in Dallas to prove it. It's just one thing after another with these people, and quite frankly, it kind of clogs the system up because you have gullible believers out there that listen to these people and accept what they're saying to them, but there's no basis for it whatsoever.
And the thing that's funny about Sinkay especially is that every one of his, I'll just be kind and call it cockeyed assertions, every last one of them had already been dismissed in earlier generations of research. Oswald in the doorway was something that Harold Weisberg was pushing for quite a while. The concept of, let's see now. What else? What else is he doing besides Oswald in the doorway? I forget now.
The Mormon photo.
Right.
He's really he's discrediting Mary Mormon on Facebook, and has been for a couple of weeks now. Even getting personal.
Yeah, he's got personal about it, but that's really an old Jack White deal. See, that's what's funny to me, is all these people have passed away. Sinkay picks up the fallen standard. You notice that?
Yeah. I mean, because like you said, this Oswald in the doorway theory has been around forever, and people have resurrected it through the years. Bill Cooper, Jack White, and the list goes on and on. But I think in this digital age that we're in with computers and Facebook and social media, that Ralph was able to disseminate it a whole lot more thoroughly than these guys ever did.
Well, yeah, that's true, but I mean, comparatively speaking, Weisberg was really one of the most well-known early researchers, and even with his self-published books that, I got one at one point. He had laminated it and bound it himself, and each page was crooked. You know what I mean? This guy, it was amazing that he was, but I really think he believed it, to be honest with you, for a while.
Yeah, personally, when it comes to Weisberg, as far as his research and speculation skills, I think they were second to his, document procuring skills. His analysis, a lot of it, I think, leaves a little bit to be desired, and his method's a little sketchy, when it comes to things like, Kerry Thornley and things like that. But yeah, this is the 1960s. They didn't have the equipment. They didn't have the computer or programs or any way to examine that Alchins photo as good as we do now. Mm-hmm. And what they're working with. They're working with grainy newspaper photos. Maybe they got original, from a newspaper service. but still, they wouldn't have had the equipment to actually examine it, because that's a very big picture. And the part we're talking about here is the doorway, and it's a very, very small part of this big, big picture. And you need to blow it up a lot just to see kind of what's going on in there. And, of course, Sankei took it to a different level. Not only is it Oswald in the doorway, but it's been altered massively. People are inserted, people are whited out, on and on and on. So it's gotten to the point of ridiculous.
Right. And I also find it fascinating that a guy who's allegedly a chiropractor by profession doesn't even bother to take body mechanics into account when he's trying to identify somebody, because no two people stand exactly the same. They can take similar positions, but there are various hints in there that, people like, well, I got to say, a guy who I think knows a little something about photography and film, Oliver Stone, stated quite, unequivocally that that was Billy Lovelady in that doorway. And I got to tell you that when I examine microscopically, mind you, the photo which I obtained from the Chicago Tribune's archives, I don't see how anybody could even begin to think that that's Oswald. When you look at that's probably a second-generation photo I have, but I mean a second-generation photo as opposed to these blurred, pixelated, and overproduced images that are all over the Internet.
Another good sign, in my opinion, too, is all the witnesses said he wasn't there.
Right.
And Oswald, in the photo, the press video, when he was being questioned, said he was in the building.
Right, naturally.
Everyone seems to support, those who want to push this idea seem to support it when Oswald says what they want, but when he clearly says he wasn't there, which knocks the idea down, there's no mention of that.
Isn't that amazing, right? And
a perfect example of that is Chuck. When they try to point to Fritz's notes and say that Oswald said that he was out front with Bill Shelley.
Oh, that cracks me up. Yes, please talk about that, because when I looked at these things, and Will Fritz, by the way, just for everybody who's listening who might not be familiar, Will Fritz was the homicide chief there in Dallas that day. Okay, who was in charge of the people that wound up questioning Oswald and was present at much of the interrogations. And his notes were notoriously fragmented and almost impossible to follow. I mean, he needed to interpret them to District Attorney Henry Wade, whom I interviewed, I think in '92, okay, about this particular issue. And he even told me that there were certain points at which, in the middle of a trial, Fritz would turn around and pull fragmented notes from his pants pocket and hand them to Wade. Okay? This guy was not organized, did not take good notes, and you got these, partial phrases, right? I mean, you've seen them, haven't you, Rob?
Yeah. And here's the problem, is Fritz actually told the Warren Commission that he did not take any notes that day of the interrogation. He actually wrote his famous notes 3 days later after Oswald was dead, because he knew he needed to, write stuff down in case there was an inquiry into Oswald's death or the investigation of the murder of the president. Mm-hmm. So he actually told the Warren Commission that he wrote these notes 3 days later. And they're very fragmented. I think the section we're talking about here just says, out with Bill Shelley in front. That's all it says. Okay, right. But earlier in the notes, it's established, he says that he, was on the second floor eating his lunch. And also in the notes, which doesn't support their theory of Oswald in the doorway, is Oswald actually told them that when he went back to the Beckley Street rooming house, he changed his clothes, his shirt, and his trousers. It's in Fritz's notes twice. Okay, but that doesn't support their theory, because if Oswald would have changed his clothes, then he couldn't have been wearing the shirt he was arrested in when he was standing in the doorway, which is what they claim.
Right. See, there's all kinds of problems with this when you examine, and it's you're correct. You got to choose, either Oswald's lying or he's not. And a little bit of that background noise right there. We actually have Charles Cliff with us. How you doing, Charles?
I'm doing well. Hi, guys. Sorry, I was having a couple of issues there getting online, but I think we got it cleared up a little bit better now.
All right. We were talking about the notes of Will Fritz. What do you think about that? Because that pertains to Oswald being in the doorway and everything. I know you got something to say about that.
Well, I think some people have selective, memory or selective meanings when they go to those notes, because those notes are very, very fragmented, and they're very hard to decipher exactly who.
We may have lost Charles, but you know what? He's making exactly the same. There you go.
Can you hear me?
Now I hear you.
Yeah, sorry.
No problem.
It's cut out there. Basically, what it is that on those notes, we have a lot of different answers, but we don't know the corresponding questions on those notes. So we really don't know exactly what those notes mean, but people are trying to interpret them in their own way and saying, well, this is what it means. But it's just going on assumption. There's no basis, there's no rhyme or reason on it. And these are what guys like Ralph Sinkay and James Fetzer and all these proponents of Oswald in the Doorway point to. These notes are kind of a smoking gun. They're not a smoking gun because they're not complete. They're very fragmented and they jump all over the place. So we really don't know what they mean.
and see, you made the point that you didn't even get to hear me make, which is that Fritz did this notoriously. This is what he did all the time. It wasn't just in this particular case. He did it all the time. So to point to this kind of thing and say, well, this is it, that's exactly not it. Thanks, guys. But this kind of thing, this is just an example, mind you, of the nonsense that goes on and the resurrected bad theories over and over again. Carmine.
Yeah.
What would you say is the worst of the mythologies in the case?
Well, I would largely agree with what Rob said about some of the worst ones. Before I go into that, I just wanted to say one last thing about the doorway man theory is that it evolved, like we were saying, how Greek into Roman mythology evolved and became things like Badge Man, Black Dog Man, Prayer Man, Tan Jacket Man, Black Hole Man, Umbrella Man. As soon as one of the figures gets knocked down as being useful, another one pops up.
Mm-hmm.
Right. The only difference here is that Robert Grodin is responsible for a lot of those blob figures out there.
Oh, yeah. No, I don't just, our side has been putting out just as much, possible misinformation as the other.
Absolutely. And you know what? I did forget to tell people that are listening, if you want to join in on the discussion or ask a question, by all means do so at 218-339-8525. Once again, that's 218-339-8525. And I guarantee you that between the 3 or 4 of us, depending on what time it is, we will have an answer for just about any question you have as to one of these theories. The worst. The worst.
I think that it's a two-way tie currently between, and I don't mean to say, I'm going the exact same way as Rob is, but I agree about, is it Sink or Sinkay? I agree. He and Baker, in my opinion, are among the 2 worst, if not the 2 worst. And the reason why I say they're the worst is not just because they lack huge amounts of evidence to prove what they say. It's also because they're actively trying to hurt the good witnesses and the stuff we can prove. They're actually setting us back because they're attacking the credible things that we can prove. And that, to me, makes them the most dangerous.
Well, you know what? Why don't you be specific about that? I mean, we talked about Mary Moorman, who took the most famous Polaroid of the assassination scene. That is the single shot that you see there where there's a motorcycle coming up behind the limo, and it's almost at the moment of the headshot. Everybody knows that image, whether you know it or not. Just look up Mary Moorman photograph of JFK assassination. You will find it several hundred different ways. But what do you think? See, now I just kind of lost my train of thought
well,
there.
Similarly along those lines. With Baker, as where Sink went after Mormon, Baker's gone after countless people. Not only has she and her minions gone after credible researchers over the years and continue to still if you try to argue with her, but she's gone after and tried to incorporate mythology into the credible instances in New Orleans. You know, it's almost like what was that used to be called, Mad Libs, where you would just fill in. You just basically take the credible story, you cut out the pieces you don't like, and you fill your own name in the parts that were once those pieces.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you right there, and I love that analogy. The Mad Libs of the JFK assassination conspiracy.
Yeah.
That's exactly what Judy Baker is, because it's some legitimate information combined with nonsense, and let's just see if it makes a sentence.
Exactly.
Yeah, that works perfectly. That's wonderful. Charles, what do you think is the worst of the worst among, like, the circulated mythologies? And I do mean the storyline or, you know, the possibilities, etc. What do you think is the worst out there?
There are two that right now that really jump out to me, which I think are complete hogwash. The first one being that there's a picture of George H.W. Bush in front of the Texas School Book Depository.
Oh, I love
there
you.
There is no such picture. There is a picture of a guy that people claim to be George Bush, but it's pretty easy to knock it down that it is not George Bush. And the second one that kind of drives me nuts right now, that people still refer to, is the whole Madeline Brown, quote, assassination party the night before the assassination, where there has been, depending on the day she tells it, 6 to 40 people there, and there was this person there and this person there, but, well, this person wasn't there, but then he was there. It's complete hogwash, and you can go, it's very easy to tell, too, because if you go into different interviews with Madeline Brown, and you can...
Unfortunately, Charles is dropping again, but...
Find them on the Internet.
Mm. Well, Charles, you're dropping out a bit, but let me help to complete your point. When you go and take a look at the different interviews of Madeline Brown as they evolved over the years, people were added to this assassination party, which was supposed to have taken place the night before. You got people that she says are there that would be the most star-studded cast of individuals I've ever heard of in my life. Everybody from John J. McCloy at certain points to J. Edgar Hoover's a popular one in the mix, and Hoover is damn near an impossibility. Okay, not necessarily completely impossible, but she's also put Richard Nixon there, Lyndon Johnson, of course, there. A whole array of figures that it just seems absolutely inconceivable that they would all be in one place. Not to mention the Dallas elites that she mentions are there. You know.
Well, there's another interesting thing on this, and this is something I came across a few months ago, is that the house that she says the party took place in, which was supposed to belong to Texas oilman Clint Murchison. Clint Murchison sold a few years before the party was supposed to happen. So I don't know how they held this party in a house he didn't own anymore.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because Madeline Brown, again, here's a blend of fact and fiction, right? Because she did have some sort of affair with Lyndon Baines Johnson. That I believe. Okay, some people question that. But I don't dispute it. I do believe that the son that she claims was fathered by Lyndon Baines Johnson was his son. Okay. Now, other than that, everything else pretty much goes out the window. I'm sorry. But that's it. You know, it's sort of like with Judy Baker. I believe she worked at the Riley Coffee Company at the same time Oswald did. Everything else, gone.
I believe you called it a brush with history story.
Yeah, well, that's what it comes down to, is these people, they have a brush with history where they have some interaction with an interesting character who plays a pivotal role in a historical event, and it's happened all the time, but in the JFK assassination, it's like a disease. It just continues to spread, and it's amazing. It's absolutely astounding to me. Okay.
Well, one thing, sorry, just quickly on that.
Sure.
One thing I found very interesting with Madeline Brown is in the early 1990s, there was a documentary put out around the same time as JFK, the movie came out, called Beyond JFK, A Question of Conspiracy. Mm-hmm. In it, there's a fairly lengthy interview with Madeline Brown. She mentions her affair with LBJ. She mentions being with LBJ on New Year's Eve 1963. You know what she never mentions? The assassination party that she claimed. Now, do you not think that would be the first thing she would mention? And on any JFK assassination documentary, that's probably what they would lead with? But yet it's not even mentioned in this documentary.
Well, you know what it is that she's a very early source, not necessarily the original source, but a very early source for Penn Jones' assertion about this assassination party. Okay? And this is where it grows from. So, I mean, it does pre-exist, that documentary, her assertions. But, yeah, it is interesting that didn't make it into that little film there, because you would think that would be something of interest, no?
Yeah.
Yeah, and meanwhile, I mean, look, not to beat the dead horse too much, but, I mean, let's not forget that, toward the end of her life, she was also, being indicted for fraud and all kinds of things, forging checks and stuff like this. I mean, this happened when she was pretty sick, and the assassination party was, pretty much out of hand. I mean, there was more than 50 people there, and it started with like 15 originally, something like that. But and the funny thing is, if you watch one of the interviews just before she died, there's a Texas-based researcher who was talking to her and basically throwing names at her, and she's going, yep, like pretty much everybody in the world was there. I love that interview of her. It's amazing. She's just sitting on a bench or something. I don't know if you guys ever seen that one, but it's pretty.
I haven't, but
you can find it. Trust me.
Yeah, I'll be gonna look for it.
Well, since we're in that area, I was wondering if we might next just quickly discuss, since we're talking about LBJ, the proponents of who would say that it definitely had to be Lyndon Johnson. Unfortunately, the evidence doesn't pan out that way. If you actually look at the evidence, that's just a guess in the parlor game, and it's a popular one. A lot of people want to blame Lyndon Johnson, and he was, in my opinion, I don't know how all of you feel about him, a villain, a political villain, but I do not see him for this crime. And it is based, as we've all had discussions about it before, on evidence. One, there was a miss, so anyone could be hit, and he was in the shooting gallery. You don't go to the place where the shooting's going to be if you're planning it. That's usually a good idea. You don't want to be there to be associated at the crime scene in the area where it occurs. You're not found, as a researcher, Zach Gendro told us, by McHugh, because he talked about how McHugh was looking for Johnson in Air Force One, and he found him in a bathroom crying, talking about how it could be a conspiracy and he could be shot at. Mm-hmm. And how safe was he?
Right, and let's not forget the many years later when the phone call was released between himself and J. Edgar Hoover, where he asks Hoover if one of those bullets was intended for him. That doesn't sound like the question being asked.
And people,
go ahead.
Yeah, and people were going to say that, he was faking it. He was just putting that out there for show. Well, at the time, that was a private phone call between him and Hoover. He had no idea at that time that anyone would ever hear that phone call.
Right.
I have a document, too, that was taken by Walter Jenkins, who was Johnson's special assistant, where he reported to Katzenbach and to Hoover that in a moment of weakness, Johnson had said that this had to be a conspiracy, and he thought somehow the CIA was involved. So, yeah, these were classified documents that nobody ever thought would be out to the public.
Right. Which
I believe
go ahead.
Just saying, I believe he also said the same thing to Walter Cronkite in the early 1970s when they were doing an interview with him, and then after that, he asked Cronkite to remove it from the actual broadcast. He didn't want that to go out.
That's right. His speculation about there being a conspiracy and the possibility that he didn't leave out the fact that there might have been foreign involvement, all this other stuff. He actually wanted it excised from the interview shortly before his death. Actually, and I could contend that Johnson had no idea what happened because at that point he was definitely suffering from problems. And I believe that part of the story about how he was, pretty much a broken man after his legacy was essentially destroyed by the Vietnam War. You could sort of see how somebody might have emotional distress afterwards, okay?
Yeah, because even looking at him as a person, he went into office fairly strong, and he was broken at the end, and that was after Vietnam, not directly after the Kennedy assassination. If people want to make, I don't think that's a logical connection to make anyway, but if that's how they want to judge it, then of course it was the war that destroyed him. Of course that's what destroyed everything that he did. It wasn't the death of John Kennedy.
Yeah, right, because he could have run again in 1968 and didn't. That was the end of it, because at that time public sentiment had turned against him. There was a lot of difficulties, that he could have faced otherwise, too, I believe, in a legal sense, regardless of the fact that he had occupied the presidency at that time. I mean, a president can be charged with crimes, believe it or not. It does happen. Doesn't seem to happen now, but anyway, another topic. But the thing is, the people that want to vilify Johnson often seize upon this whole Mac Wallace thing, too.
There's another one, another canard.
Which, unfortunately, is also no good. And the reason is they seize upon this partial fingerprint that's found on the 6th floor that they say is unidentified, and it is. But here's what your problem is. When you actually compare it to Malcolm Wallace's military record fingerprints, guess what happens, ladies and gentlemen? It's not a match. I don't know. I don't know what to say. I'm so sick of the let's play the president game, because they've tried to blame Nixon, Johnson, George H.W. Bush, and each one of them criminally culpable in many different ways. Some of them should be tried for murder and war crimes. But guess what? I can't hang JFK's murder around their necks. It just, simply because someone is a rapist doesn't make them a murderer. Or even vice versa, okay? It's just that simple, folks. And I'm using that as an example. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we should only attribute to them what we can prove.
Precisely.
Right.
And that's unfortunately something that not everyone doesn't believe in.
Exactly. Rob, what do you think about that?
Yep.
I agree wholeheartedly, and just to add a little bit to the Mac Wallace mythos, everybody likes to say, he was JFK's personal hitman. Okay, he killed all these people for Lyndon Johnson, of which there's zero proof. Okay, he did kill one person, but that one person happened to be banging his wife. So you can kind of understand, maybe a crime of passion, okay? And he was tried for it, and he did get off of it. But and he's an interesting guy when you look at his life and his life path. But there's absolutely no proof whatsoever of the allegation that he was anybody's hitman or that he killed anybody other than Kinzer, or that his fingerprint was in the 6th floor.
You guys want to try and take a phone call, by the way?
Sure.
Because I got one that's popped up on the board here, and I'm kind of surprised. It's a 617 area code. You're on the air.
Did somebody say hitman?
Hey, what's going on, man?
Hi, guys.
Good time,
man. I'm on the road heading home from work, and I thought I'd call in and listen since I had some time on my hands.
Well, thanks, man. No, it's good to hear from you.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
You were talking about presidents and thumbprints, huh?
I'm sorry. Can you back off the phone just a little bit? Because I think it's causing it to distort a little.
It could be I'm driving in a bad spot. So why don't you guys go ahead and I'll try and call back when I'm on solid ground.
All right, cool.
Okay, talk to you then, Hitman.
Fuck it. Yeah, Hitman.
Sorry. Yeah, it was making a little bit of noise there, so I didn't want to... Oh, Rob, you're feeding back my voice. Okay. Anyway.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's a lot better.
Okay.
It's probably just because I'm too damn loud anyhow. But but anyway, back to it. Okay, we're talking about the lineage of presidents that are allegedly involved in it. But, I mean, it gets even worse from there in my estimation. And I think the people that combine these myths together make it just immensely more difficult for anyone to examine anything regarding a real scenario. You know, like Rob brought up, there's at least, Carmine actually brought up that there's at least one missed shot, right? Mm-hmm. So we all know about James Tague. James Tague is the guy who was actually, they call him the third wounded man that day, and he was struck in the face with either a piece of the projectile or a piece of the curb. Something ricocheted and hit this man in the face and cut him. Okay. That contention, I do believe, is real. It's one of those things that's provable. It's one of the things that actually caused the single bullet theory to have to be invented, in my estimation. Okay? But there's also the possibility of other missed shots as well. Okay. Not only could not everything have been collected that day, but there's evidence from eyewitnesses that state that there was something that landed exactly at the right time on the opposite side of the street from the grassy knoll and all that. And this, because we don't have any forensic evidence for a strike from the grassy knoll to Kennedy. Okay, Connolly, I'm not sure of. But we don't have evidence for a strike from the grassy knoll to Kennedy. What does that mean? Well, that to me means that the possibility that there was a miss is very real. Now, it doesn't mean that that's an absolute. I'm just saying that the possibility exists. And it was never investigated. That much we're sure of. Okay?
Even the commission didn't have a sequence of shots ever planned out. That's one of the biggest flaws, in my opinion, in that whole idea. They had three separate sequences. So if they can't even demonstrate how the shots were fired, this was definitely a case that was a posthumous case. The guy was dead, so you really weren't going to have to prove anything. This was just to get by, in my opinion.
Yeah,
exactly.
Just to give them something they can believe in.
Exactly. And look, very convenient because after all, they did circulate those interviews that he did, on DSU radio. And I don't know if the television interview circulated right away, but I do know the radio interview circulated right away. And even that Latin Listening Post interview started to circulate in the mainstream media for a little bit. They were playing audio clips on other radio stations all around the country of this guy basically declaring that he was not a communist, but a Marxist-Leninist, which is an interesting little, sort of declaration there, which is fairly sophisticated. Of course, he couldn't explain it when he was asked to, but hey, who's counting, right? Meanwhile, meanwhile, people like to play with that and explain that away all different ways too. Are the individuals that were involved in the interviews probably disinformation agents who had links to intelligence agencies? Yes.
Well, there's one we can actually prove, and that was the son. There was a father and son. Both were in the CRC. The son was the one who interviewed Oswald when he came to try to talk to those people that were connected with Bringier.
Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah, definitely. At least one was.
And Ed Butler.
Rodriguez. I'm sorry, Rodriguez. That was the name of the gentleman.
Right. That's the interviewer from when he did the whole thing with the pamphlets. But also Ed Butler is another guy whose, funding appears to have originated with the CIA as well. Right. The the Information Center for the Americas or something like this. Mm-hmm. Either way, this guy and. Again, I shudder because people like Ed Haslam talk about Inca, right? You know a little something about that, don't you, Rob?
A little bit, I mean, just bringing that name up, and I think, and I actually saw Ed Haslam at a conference last year. I watched him give his 2-hour plus presentation, and I guess, what a lot of people don't know about Ed Haslam is that he wrote a book before he actually wrote Dr. Mary's Monkey called Mary, Fairy, and the Monkey Virus, which had nothing in it whatsoever about Judith Baker or this whole cancer, fast-acting cancer assassination plot. He was just making, I guess, various leaps, because I'm not aware of any documentation about David Ferry and Mary Sherman ever working together on anything. They're drawing a lot of conclusions, just from the fact that, he had a couple mice in his apartment. But, and then, so then Judy Baker comes out with her story, and then Ed Haslam rewrites his first book and includes Judith Baker into the narrative, all of which, whatever she says can't be substantiated by any kind of evidence whatsoever when it comes to what she was alleging that she took part in with Oswald and David Ferry and Mary Sherman in creating the so-called fast-acting cancer virus that Oswald was supposed to take to Cuba and kill Castro with. But it's just interesting to see the lineage of things. You got Ed Haslam helping Judith Baker write her book. Mm-hmm. And they pop up at a lot of the same conferences together, and they kind of corroborate each other, but it's just hot air coming from both sides, because nothing can be substantiated, really. Yes, there's a true mystery that Mary Sherman was died in a very, very bad way, probably murdered, but there's absolutely no evidence that she was murdered with a laser weapon or whatever it is he's alleging. Just the whole story is not backed up by anything. Just a lot of speculation and supposition, and quite frankly, stories that can't be substantiated. So,
and what's really fun,
the problem with Ed Haslam and Judith Baker. They corroborate each other, but
right.
Other than that, it's a good story, but they can't back it up with anything tangible.
And what's really hysterical about that to me is not only the major assertions of like Judy Baker's tales, okay, it's like 1,001 tales from Judy Baker in that book, but even the smallest assertions fall apart when you examine them. Like, I loved that article that Zach and Trish had put out there. I think it was Zach Gendro and Trish Fleming had collaborated on it about Reverend James, right?
Yeah, the Reverend James Souvenir Shop.
Well, see, I thought that was a problem for a completely different reason than they did, and I applaud them for thinking about what else could have been a problem there.
Yeah, the segregation laws and all the other things that were going on at the time that she'd never considered before she decided to tell the story.
Yeah. And also calling him Reverend James, even though
that wasn't his name.
No, they were calling him Reverend Jim.
Oh, excuse me, Reverend
Jim.
Yeah, but James was his last name.
Yeah. So I've never heard of anybody turning their last name James into... Actually, we know a guy with the last name James. We ought to ask him about that. If he's ever turned his last name into Jim. Because I've never heard of such a thing, fellas. Have you?
Yeah, shortening the first name,
never.
Usually, not the last.
Yeah. Right. It's a different name when you're talking about a last name. You don't normally shorten your last name, only your first.
Right. If you did, you would call it by a letter or something like that, because there's too many guys with the same first name. So, you become, like, say, for instance, if there's Charles and myself, we're both actually named Charles. If both of us wanted to be called Chuck, you might say, well, that's Chuck C and that's Chuck O. You know what I mean? This kind of thing might happen for shortening a last name. But if you're on an intimate sort of interaction with somebody where you're seeing them every single day, generally speaking, you'd either give them another nickname or you'd shorten their first name somehow to differentiate it. Like somebody might call you Charlie and me Chuck, or vice versa, in order to differentiate who we are. But nobody would go, well, you're Charles Clee.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're going to talk about this more in the second hour, and I promise you we're going to get into one of the master myths of the JFK assassination. So stay tuned to the Ochelli Effect here on American Freedom Radio at AmericanFreedomRadio.com. We'll be right back.
I like very much
radio.
You're an American institution.
American Freedom Radio.
Did you know there are 3 million edible food plants on Earth, and none have the nutritional value of the hemp plant? HempUSA.org offers you hemp protein powder. It does not contain chemicals or THC, is non-GMO, and is 100% gluten-free. Hemp protein powder burns fat, builds muscle, contains 53% protein, and feeds the body the nutrients it needs. Call 888-910-4367 and see what our powder, seeds, and oil can do for you. Only at HempUSA.org. HempUSA.org introduces 3 brand new detox formulations of microplant powder. Brain Fuel for depression, bipolar disorders, and stress. Total Care, anti-cancer agent that cleans the liver and organs and increases memory. Rejuvenate, invigorates and heals the body, mind, and spirit. These products are your alternative to pharmaceuticals. Call 888-910-4367 and like us on Facebook. We ship worldwide. Only at HempUSA.org.
American Freedom Radio is back. We're trying to become commercial-free, apart from a few honourable advertisers that we would give ad space to even if they couldn't pay us. In this quest to deliver quality radio with very few annoying ads, we are now asking the listeners like you to open up and become partners with American Freedom Radio. We all know the economy is controlled, and a new system called the peer-to-peer economy is now within our grasp. That means if you'd like this network with its incredible hosts and credible information to be nothing but the content you want to hear, then you must realize that you cannot be a part of it if you're just sitting on the sidelines watching. Go to AmericanFreedomRadio.com and pledge your support today. Donate according to your means. Some can only afford $1 a month, while others can afford $100 a month. Regardless of the size of your contribution, it all adds up to keeping the network owners and the radio hosts housed and fed at the end of every month. Thank you.
We are living in a new era. Partnerships are more important than profit, and gratitude is more respected than greed. As the millennial generation evolves the corporate landscape, our company aims to maximize the achievements of CBD application and push the limits of what's possible by 2020. Our core product matrix and careful cannabidiol purification process are uniquely designed to be privately made in different regions of the world and is geared to assist the efforts of different nations to change the landscape of various pain-related healthcare costs, epilepsy and autism, rising mental disorders, and even soldier suicides. Crystal Pure CBD is made with the industry's finest 99.9% pure CBD crystals. No paste, no filler. Our solution is a permanent answer, and it saves you over 1/3 in cost. Crystal Pure CBD. Come join us.
You're listening to AmericanFreedomRadio.com, the network who perseveres in delivering intelligent debate, constructive dialogue with true independence. The freedom to broadcast the truth is not free at all. So what is American Freedom Radio worth to you? The empowering information with fun, honest and pure integrity behind it provides an example to follow. Friendships to flourish with the moral altruism that pulls no punches. The hosts sacrifice and show remarkable discipline in their duty to deliver quality radio in service to the community with strength, wisdom and loyalty. The founders of AFR wish to thank you personally for sharing your views and insights to make the best radio and alternative media. Now it's time for you to give something back and play a vital role in the future of America. Be as generous with us as we've been with you. Click on the donate banner at AmericanFreedomRadio.com or volunteer by emailing AmericanFreedomRadio.com. Vaccine, psychotropic drugs, and artillery batteries not included.
No rules. No rules. No taboo topics. No taboo topics. No fear of doom. No fear of doom. We are American Freedom Radio. American Freedom Radio.
So the second hour begins here on the Ochelli Effect on American Freedom Radio at AmericanFreedomRadio.com. I got to tell you guys, this has been kind of fun for me tonight because we are revisiting a whole lot of bad material. And I have no other phrase for it at the moment that I really wish to utter. But a lot of bad material in the JFK assassination conspiracy world. And listen, I want to believe in many a theory. I really do. I would love to believe that George H.W. Bush was part of the assassination plot. Unfortunately, there's, what is that word again, Carmine, that we're missing for it?
Evidence.
Oh, right, evidence. This is generally an important thing when attempting to create a plausible scenario behind a crime and reconstruct it. You require this little pesky thing called evidence. And we're talking about a lot of the worst fiction out there, and trust me, we are going to get into a master myth here very shortly, but I kind of want to turn it right on over to Rob Clark because he mentioned something in the break here that I found extremely hysterical, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to keep a straight face during this, Rob, but I'd like you to tell the listener about the massive, most prolific serial killer in the Western world's history. That is allegedly, not only part of the assassination, but allegedly a killer, murderer, or God even knows if he exists. Rob.
Well, buckle in for this one, guys, because this comes from, of course, one of the master proprietor of a lot of these myths that are out there today, Jim Fetzer, who I think twice in the past 3 years has had this guest on. Her name is Haley Otis. And she claims that her brother and her cousin, this guy named Clyde Forshaw and their cousin Walter Tabinski, were some of the biggest killers out there, bank robbers. They participated in the JFK assassination. She says her brother was Raul, and also they took credit for the killings of the Zodiac, the Toronto Strangler, the Boston Strangler. They were these several
wait a minute.
robbers.
Wait a second, Rob. Yeah. Raul, to clarify for people, is, because not everybody knows this kind of stuff. Remember, this is kind of inside. Raul is this guy that James Earl Ray, the alleged assassin of Martin Luther King Jr., claims to have been involved with him at certain points. Not making any judgments about that on this program, okay? I'm just saying to you that this is who this character is. So not only is this guy involved in all these major serial killings, but he's also involved in multiple high-profile political assassinations in American history. Never caught or anything, though, right, Rob?
That's right. He's still cruising around today. And I swear, some of the funniest moments I've ever heard on that show come directly from this story. And the one time he was talking to her, she claimed that he was outside of her window wearing oversized shoes and a golf hat or something to this effect, or in a backpack and oversized shoes, like clown shoes. And Jim Fetzer was so worried about this woman that he took it upon himself to try to call the FBI and let them know that they need to investigate this. And the funniest bit of audio I've ever heard in my life is the runaround that Jim Fetzer got when he tried to call the FBI and tell him this fantastical story about these serial killers, these great assassins, and oh my God, it was hilarious. And of course, he put it in an article, which he put on Veterans Today, to which Clyde Forshaw's son, Alfred, actually replied to and said that this is total nonsense. My dad is almost 80 years old. He was in a car accident. He's disabled. He doesn't go out much anymore. And that this woman is Looney Tunes. Okay? And eventually the article got taken down. The shows got taken down. And unless you were there to actually hear it or hear about it close to the time, it's been wiped from history. But this is why, you have to take things when it comes from certain people with a grain of salt. Because, I don't want to turn this into a Fetzer bashing session, but he's been behind Madeline Brown. He's been behind Judy Baker. He's been behind Haley Otis. He's been behind Ralph Sinkay. He's been behind the OIC, the Oswald Innocence Campaign. So, not only that, but some of the nuttier theories of 9/11. He's a Holocaust denier, on and on. I think his most recent one with Clyde Lewis, people see his true colors. So, but yeah, I just thought I wanted to share that with you as the most ludicrous JFK theory I've ever heard. Like, she claims that this one guy was, their cousin was Apron Man in Dealey Plaza and was a mystery man in Mexico. And
Roe?
The guy with the apron shot JFK in the throat with a paralyzing pellet. And then Clyde Forshaw from the grassy knoll, took the headshot. It's just total nonsense.
I'm sorry. I can't stop laughing. And I'll tell you why, because here's my personal connection to both of the things that you're just talking about. One of the reasons, and I ended up as a guest on his show, his podcast show, on another network one time, because I was sending him nasty messages about exactly this kind of stuff. Okay, and telling him what is wrong with you. It's one thing to be kooky. It is yet another to go off planet. Okay, you've lost it. And it ended up with like snappy replies back and forth. And he said, "Okay, why don't you come and be a guest on my show?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure, why not?" And I didn't have a show at that point in time or anything. I was just advising other people as to what the hell was wrong with some of their guests. When I would listen myself. Now, here's the funny thing about the Ground Zero deal, and I probably shouldn't say this, but I will anyway, to hell with it. You want to know who actually is responsible for putting him on that show that night? It's me. Because I turned around and told their producer, because their producer wanted somebody to speak, and bear with me, guys, before both of my guests hang up on me and never speak to me again. The thing is, they wanted somebody to logically speak about the fact that conspiracy theories are more believable than the mainstream media gives them credit for. Like conspiracy theory is more of a reasonable line of thought. Now, in fairness to Uncle Fester, he does a very good presentation on how conspiracy theories are actually more logical. Okay? Stuff like that I would say, even personally, about the fact that, human beings working together to achieve a goal is actually a lot more logical and a lot more efficient. It doesn't have to be 80,000 of them, okay? But a group of them is a more plausible idea here than a lone assassin, certainly. And it's not crazy to believe that groups of people would work together, for mutual interests, okay? And Fetzer actually does a good presentation on this. That's what they wanted him to talk about. He wouldn't stay on the subject, and, well, you heard what happened. Okay? But believe it or not, I'm the one who suggested him to their producers when they wanted somebody to speak about that.
Nice.
So,
yeah,
personally,
Fox News calls him up when they want to put the kooky professor on the news and make all conspiracy theorists look like crazy people.
Oh, yeah, yeah. But see, if he would have stuck to the subject and not had to go into, no Jews died, all this kind of land, if he didn't insist upon that, which, you know, I'm willing to even entertain the concept that the numbers are askew and that the history books are wrong. I'm willing to entertain that concept. I am not willing to entertain, though, when I've talked to people that, you know, liberated some of those camps, when I've actually interviewed individuals, and this is in a whole other line of interviews that I've done before. I've interviewed people with numbers on their arms. Okay? Don't tell me that this didn't happen. Okay? Otherwise, you're looking at... it's just ridiculous. I mean, we're breathing air, aren't we? You know, come on.
Well, and I think Fetzer, too, is unfortunately, I guess I forgot, maybe, I just didn't want to repeat exactly what Rob said, but Fetzer, too, I suppose would qualify with Sink and Baker, that they're dangerous. They're dangerous to not only us ever finding out the truth about any of these things that people have problems with, but they're dangerous to even the conversation. They're poisoning the conversation with the rest of the public before anyone of credibility can actually, you know, show reasoning and evidence for why some of these things are rational.
Exactly.
And that's why we, you know, I was talking to Chuck earlier about what do we think our philosophy is behind doing the Myth series, and it's because someone needs to speak for the reasonable people, which I think are the majority. I think they're the fringe. The fringe, 10 to 20%, have been dragging down everybody for decades. So the only way we're ever going to get past them is to expose what their bad ideas are and move on. Clear the field so we can actually start talking about the evidence and not having to waste our time talking about the preposterous things they try to suggest.
Precisely. And, you know, again, not trying to just focus on Fetzer here, but, man, you know, a large target is a large target. I cannot think of a single conspiracy theory in the Kennedy assassination that is absolutely horrible as far as having evidence to back it, that this guy has not endorsed. It's like he has never encountered a conspiracy theory that he did not, you know, absolutely fall in love with. Well, excuse me, unless it actually involves evidence. That's, you know, a whole other area. Mm-hmm. But that's the reality of this guy, and I think it was actually really educational for the public if you caught him on ground zero, because now you know exactly how it works. This is the way he behaves. This is the way he's behaved for a long time. He used to jump up at seminars, at conferences, and start screaming about the Zapruder film when people were having rational presentations go on regarding, you know, still photograph evidence. You know, stuff like this. He's extremely disruptive and misleading. Extremely misleading. And it saddens me every time somebody, you know, comes to me and I have to spend a half hour to an hour pulling away the crap, you know, that these people have ever after shoveled upon the community. And Fetzer's been at it since the mid-'90s. And truthfully, he started out in a good spot. It's just that he, you know, in slow motion has gone completely off the cliff. You know.
I'll tell you another reason he did, too.
Sure.
We're talking about the motorcycle cops. He calls them the Four Horsemen. But he's alleging now that, according to interviews done by Fred Newcomb and an old LBJ did a guy from the 70s, that he interviewed a lot of these motorcycle cops back then, and the motorcade actually stopped for almost up to 14 seconds, long enough for, I think it was Hargis, or it was either Hargis or Cheney, to get off their motorcycle and walk behind the limousine. Okay?
Had to be Cheney. Yeah, it had to be Cheney, because I talked to Hargis and he never said any such thing. So,
there's absolutely zero photographic evidence of this, no film evidence of this, no eyewitness testimony to this. You know, and it's ludicrous. I mean, they're claiming a cop drove his motorcycle up the grassy knoll, of which we have no proof of this. You know, it's just an example of the type of things that they keep coming out with over and over and over again.
Well, if I remember, there was a cop that did do that afterwards. I think that actually did happen at some point, or at least according to his own statement. I think that's where that comes from. But again, we don't have any photographic corroboration of what this guy describes. You have guys laying down their bikes at the curb. That
right.
We can see that in multiple films.
Well, they claim it's been removed from film.
Well, right, because anything that doesn't show up, Rob, as soon as you tell them, listen, there's no, out of the array of 400 photographs that I've laid my hands on, this person's not in them. They tell you, well, that's because he's been removed. The films were edited, or the photographs never made it back to the people that got them. That's why it doesn't exist.
and that's where everyone rational should challenge them and say, prove it. Because if they can't, it doesn't matter.
Right. And within the existing evidence, the photographic, the interviews that have been conducted, within those things, the official documents, within those things, there's plenty of reasonable leads.
Mm-hmm.
Leads.
And provable errors and problems.
Yes.
But that all gets lost beneath, the wave of, vocal fecal matter that pours from the mouth of some of these people.
Vocal fecal matter.
and even if back in the day, Fred Newcomb actually did interview one of these cops, and they did say that, it's not out of the realm of possibility that that they could have been like Jerry Hemming, who liked to tell tall tales just for the hell of it, to have fun with people, and they probably were tired of talking about it, didn't want to talk about it, and okay, well, this guy wants to know something, I'll tell him something, make him look like an idiot,
Mm-hmm.
Something along those lines, because they're claiming that whoever this motorcycle cop was picked up a piece of JFK's skull and threw it back in a limo, just crazy stuff, and we have absolutely no corroborative proof of that whatsoever, and like I said, it's not out of the realm of possibility for one of these guys to just hemming somebody is what I call it.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is part of the equation here, is that by the time you reach a lot of these guys and you start to cross-reference the data points in their interviews, and look, don't even believe me, I did it myself, but forget me, I only interviewed 50 of these guys. Take a look at a guy like Larry Sneed, who talked to a couple of hundred of them. Right? If you just go through his book, No More Silence, how many overlapping stories do you have where you got 2, 3, 4 guys who claim to have done the same exact thing, who signed off on reports where they weren't present, all kinds of crap in the paperwork versus their own stories? It's extremely remarkable. And even if you give a margin of error to Sneed of say 40%, which I don't believe, but let's just say you assume that he's 40% incorrect, you still have problems, immense problems, with their statements, with their paperwork, with everything. Okay? And I figured that out after about 50 of them. So, there you go. But anyway, back to it, and gee, we actually went into evidence land instead of mythos land for a second there.
It's always a good thing.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's like I can't help it. I'll never forget the assertions I was reading from people about Stavis Ellis, who is also a cop, okay, at that point in time, claiming to have seen different bullet strikes and all this other stuff. And I went back to my own interview on him because I knew I had spoken to him and couldn't find it at first because I had him filed as Stephen Ellis. Okay. But when I finally did it and I looked back at it, I can see that this guy probably wasn't really paying attention to what was going on, because he missed things that were immediately in his proximity, even though telling me that he's looking, it's like this. If you were looking at the limo at the time, you couldn't have missed that there was a commotion in the limo, okay? Very simple. You might have not known what was happening. You might not have heard the shots, especially with the motorcycle engines the way they were and everything else, right? But you would have known something was wrong. You couldn't be looking there and say, well, I didn't see any sort of disturbance. They just seem to be driving along like normal. That's not possible if you were looking at it, okay? And if that's really exactly how observant you are, well, doesn't speak very highly of the quality of law enforcement officer in Dallas in 1963. But anyway.
Yeah, do you mind if I name a few more?
Oh, absolutely.
Hopefully set up a knockdown.
Yeah, really, because we haven't gotten to James Files or
Sounds good. Let's start it with that. James Files, another another unlikely tale based on improbable claims.
Mm-hmm.
Files, as both of you I'm sure know and the listener may know, claims to be the grassy knoll gunman. Unfortunately, the ballistics evidence and the forensic evidence that experts like Jerry Feaster have looked at do not match his claims. A shot did not emerge from the grassy knoll that struck JFK's head, because the damage would have been on the opposite side, where the bullet would have entered from that corner of the knoll and then blown out the opposite side of his head.
Mm-hmm.
So we can safely say that a knoll shot did not land. And thus Files, just in that claim, is disproven. But, additional claims that he's made, such as that there was a last-minute change, which sounds a lot like one of the assertions that Jim Garrison had made, which never happened, because it wasn't, the route was decided and then it was put in the paper the next day when the final decision was made. So it was available for people to find.
And in fairness to Jim Garrison, and I hate to do this, but I have to, in fairness to Jim Garrison, he was extremely misled by some of the very same early characters we're talking about here. Harold Weisberg, for instance.
Yeah.
Between that, the fact that the CIA, as far as I'm concerned, was provably, screwing around with the investigation, all right? And
the Department of Justice was using its people to try to influence it. They flew in Boswell to try to do damage control on what Fink had said, and they didn't end up needing to use him, so they sent him home. But there are documents that show that they were actively trying to manipulate the investigation.
Right. So between the official and manipulation, see, this is what the problem is. Here it is in a nutshell. What happened to the Jim Garrison investigation is what has happened to the research community ever after. Between the official lie being pushed, okay, and being and being completely as the proprietors of the official lie, their interference, okay, to get at the actual investigation, in conjunction with the poorly founded conspiracy theorists, you have a conglomeration of, incoherent conspiracy theory is what happened to Garrison. And it wasn't, some of it, look, judge however you wish, but a lot of it was intentional and had nothing to do with whatever the man had in his mind when he was trying to get at what he was trying to get at. And it's actually amazing that he pointed at Clay Shaw the way he did with as little information as he had to work with realistically. Okay? So,
I don't, as you know, I'm one of the few people who doesn't mind saying that I don't agree with many of the things that Garrison said, but I do commend him for his attempt. He put in a lot more work than all the other combined officials, and he had to do it while fighting the CIA and the Justice Department, who were trying to close down his investigation the entire time. They, in one document in the AARB, they talk about how Boswell said that that Clay Shaw's attorney was notified by the Justice Department about Abraham Bolden and other facts that they might be able to use against Garrison and details about his witnesses. And Garrison was the legal official. The Justice Department should have been helping him, not helping Clay Shaw's attorneys.
Right. Rob, what do you have to say about all this?
Yeah, I mean, it's not only happened back then, during the Garrison case, it's been happening ever since. And I mean, you can point to things like early David Lifton. He's saying that there was an assassin dressed up like a tree in Dealey Plaza. Okay. I mean, you can take the nuttiest of the nuttiest to just the biggest kookery you can find to just people, just outright lies. Nowadays, look, we're talking about people like Beverly Oliver. And I think, guys like Dennis Morissette have been doing good work, and Fred James trying to prove that that's not her, as the babushka lady in Dealey Plaza. So a lot of her claims can be debunked, and this is a person that's been profiting off this for 40 years, associating herself with the assassination and writing a book and, doing the speaking circuit and all this and that. And, I even think she claimed to have some pictures from her camera that were clearly from the Knicks films, just really, really questionable stuff, when it all comes down to it, of people trying to defraud their way into the narrative of the assassination.
Right. And what else is next on the list, Carmine? We've now covered Files, the babushka lady.
Why don't we knock out the driver shot JFK, Bill Cooper's myth?
Oh, man, that kills me. That one absolutely kills me because it's just a horrible copy of the Zapruder film.
Mm-hmm.
And really, that's where it ends. He claimed to have seen documents. He claimed to have seen documents while being, involved in intelligence operations with, God help us, some fleet out somewhere else. And having been passed documents that a Secret Service agent was involved in the assassination and, in fact, was the driver who turns and fires over his shoulder in the Zapruder film, allegedly, right?
Which,
totally different nonsense, but even as late as this year, I'm still getting questions about this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, people trying to propagate the idea that it was the driver or that it was Secret Service. It had to be Secret Service complicity. As you know, I believe that the most feasible is a compartmentalized plot, a small plot of people, and chances are it would have been none of the officials involved that day, because it would have been so obvious. Some of these claims that people try to make about them being involved. For instance, it's actually things I think we can blame them for other things, like Clint Hill, who officials like to tout as one of the great Secret Service agents, was one of the four who we can prove with documents, we can prove with the statement of James Rowley, the head of the Secret Service, that they were drinking and partying up until a few hours before they had to get up and go to the motorcade.
Yeah.
That's what people should be mad about. They shouldn't be trying to say that they were responsible for the assassination. If anything, maybe their mistakes helped it happen.
Yeah, their sloppiness, their absolute derogation of duty, right? These kinds of things, yes. And what's funny is, even though Hill is hungover, he's the only one who moves. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
That I always find amazing. But what that leads me into is one of the worst Secret Service things, because, the limo driver shot him is just plain stupidity. But the other funny thing, which did get pushed again around the 50th anniversary, is this, oh my God, the Menninger thing about the Secret Service agent Hickey picking up the civilian version of the M16 and popping a shot into the back of Kennedy's head accidentally. Oh my God! And I could not believe that. I forget which major cable channel was carrying it at the time, but a documentary on it and then a big discussion on it that they ran ad nauseum all around the 50th anniversary, which caused people to once again bring out this discredited theory that Hickey had actually sued the author over.
Mm-hmm.
The original author of this conspiracy theory was sued by the Secret Service agent who was being basically called the assassin of John F. Kennedy.
And as you know, the year that it came out, Hickey had died just before that. So he could no longer sue him.
So it was resurrected right after he passed away, and then it would have fallen upon his estate. And what are they going to do? Keep suing people over the same stupidity?
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing to me. The Secret Service, let's just put a cap on it. Sloppy work, crap work. Nobody should have been celebrated there. The only guy who seemed to do his job on the scene was Clint Hill, and he was hungover.
And people should have been fired.
And people should have been fired. And who was fired, gentlemen?
No one.
Bolton. Not one got fired.
Yeah, not one in Dallas. Yeah, Bolton got fired, but, that feasibly could have been for a number of things, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. It also could have been for him talking. Some of what Bolton said was true. We can verify that there were people in Chicago We can verify, we can't verify exactly as the plot would have went down, but there were people cited. You do have Thomas Arthur Valley getting arrested, and you do have a similar plot occur in Dallas.
Mm-hmm.
Another lone, crazed military person with a lot of, I suppose at least Valley had ammunition.
Right. Right. And, of course, another former military guy with an axe to grind with the U.S. government, so another convenient patsy could have been had in Chicago. I don't know, guys. When you see similar things happening over and over again, where does coincidence lead off and conspiracy begin, right?
When does the pattern start?
Yeah. So, all right. Now, we've been over all these things. What else have we missed as far as the recap goes? Because believe it or not, this was 4 shows worth, guys. Anybody listening to this? This was 4 shows worth on another network that we covered each of these things. And believe me, we're not done.
Yeah. No, this... think of this as a buffet to begin.
Yeah.
I would like to mention, there's a guy, and I think it was either late last year or early this year, who was pushing the theory on YouTube that, of course, Connolly shot JFK.
Well, okay. Let's see. How many limo occupants can we... The only thing they haven't done is blame Nellie yet, right?
Yeah. She's the only one.
Connolly has been blamed. Jackie has been blamed. The driver has been blamed. There's been the theory floated that there was an explosive device in the seat. Yes, that theory exists. You can find it. Okay. And guess what? A single one of these things that we have talked about tonight so far, there is just zero evidence. They're ludicrous on their face, but even if you want to believe the wildest conspiracy theory, I say right now, if you can show me that the Easter Bunny hung from his toes, off of a UFO and shot him in the face with a ray gun, I have one question for you, which is show me the evidence. And if you have it, I will tell the world that is what happened. Okay? If you have a bunch, you're not going to be one piece of evidence, by the way. But if you have a conglomeration, a composite, put together to show me logically that makes sense, you can show me the Easter Bunny exists. You can show me that he was present in Dealey Plaza. You can show me that the ray gun existed and that it was present in Dealey Plaza. I'll even give you all of the marksmanship possibilities. No problem. We'll leave the theory, the shooting solution out of it. Just do that and I'll buy it. But you know what? That theory which I just proposed, which sounds absolutely ridiculous and ludicrous, is a lot better than the stuff that we're talking about tonight, believe it or not.
Yeah, and Chuck, people might ask why we care so much about trying to clean this stuff up, and I have a good example of why. And there's a conference coming up in October in New Orleans, being put on by Judith Baker and Trine Day, featuring a host of speakers that, quite frankly, I'd say probably 90% of them are LBJ Did It guys, or it's Judy and Ed Haslam, people like this, Roger Stone, and this information is going to get disseminated, to the community through this conference,
right?
And people fail to realize, and look, hundreds of investigators at the time of the assassination and through the years, 50 years since. They turned New Orleans and Dallas upside down to shake out witnesses and to re-interview people, and nobody, not ever one, came across Judith Baker ever. People who had the opportunity to leverage that info that supposedly knew her never did. Jack Ruby, David Ferry, Marcello, Bannister, Nivelle, Nigel, Thornley, all these people. And let me remind everyone that if her story is true, she engaged in adultery, conspiracy to commit murder against Castro, treason, first-degree murder of inmates tested on, and the biggest of them all, treason for having knowledge of a plot to kill Kennedy and not doing anything to prevent it. Mm-hmm. So there you go. That in conjunction with the following, and I love this statement. It happened on my show. Joan Mellon,
okay, who is an author that I happen to think is one of the best, okay, regarding not only the Kennedy assassination, but as a biographer, all right? But has written several books that do involve characters from the Kennedy assassination, 2 books on Jim Garrison, okay? You know what? When I broach this question, she gets uncomfortable, she gets angry with it. But what did she say on my show? Ready for this one, folks? She interviewed over 1,200 people. Let me say that again. Over 1,200 people that were involved in the New Orleans aspect of the Kennedy assassination and the Garrison investigation. Now, here is the question I put to you, the listener. How many of them verified a single syllable of Judith Vary Baker's story? Want to know the answer? 0. 0. How do you get that kind of number? I know one of you guys heard that on my show. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you did. Is that not just like the end of it right there?
It should be. I think for a lot of these myths, people just need to they need to start separating, in my opinion. People need to separate what they can actually verify themselves and what they can't. And don't just take the word. Just because someone wrote a book doesn't necessarily mean that everything they say in the book is true unless they can present you with some evidence.
Mm-hmm.
And taking it on faith is a mistake.
Right. And you know what? Forget about it. I'll tell you what. Here's where I'm going to remove the evidence from the equation real quick and just ask you to use your own common sense. Okay? Now Judith Vary Baker has a book out about David Ferry. Right? I think that was released last year, or was it this year, guys?
Last year.
Last year. Yeah. Okay. Last year she released a book on David Ferry. Because she had this personal relationship with him for a few months, right?
According to her.
According to her. Okay. She has 500 plus pages on an individual that she knew for a couple of months, that she got to know so well that she could produce 500 pages while she's involved in a cancer plot, a love affair, various other things, getting married to another man, et cetera, all these things that she's allegedly doing at the time. She had the wherewithal to collect enough information to create a 500-page book 50 years later.
But unfortunately didn't have enough to have any shred of credible evidence to back her story.
Oh, there goes that pesky thing, evidence again. But I'm just asking you to consider, how many people do you think that you could know for a couple of months with that kind of a busy schedule and come up with 500 pages of a book for?
It seems to stretch belief.
Yeah.
What
Not to mention she was working all the time, too, back then.
There you go. And stretching credulity to the point of what? Transparency? I don't know. I don't have words for this. And people still want to believe it.
Well, I think it's also the way that she... and you know what? I know we got other things we have to move on to, but it's something that Judith shares with Fetzer and all the others. And that is that they have a need to insert themselves in the center of whatever is the latest myth. And that alone should I hope, lend itself to people understanding that it has nothing to do with credibility for them. It has nothing, in my opinion, it has nothing to do with actually helping people whatsoever. It has to do with keeping the attention on themselves all the time. If these people cared about the people in the verifiable JFK story, that they said, if they cared as much as they said they did, they would actually try to prove something and further the case along. They wouldn't be a roadblock to every credible researcher that comes in and tries to make progress.
Absolutely. So, listen, guys, we are, believe it or not, down to the last 15 minutes, okay, of airtime. So why don't we go, what is left on the list, Carmine, of what we've already covered?
Okay.
Because we got to go bullet points here just to get to it.
Okay,
not elaborate too much, but go ahead.
Roscoe White.
Okay. Roscoe White, another Dallas police officer who is alleged to have been, well, let's see, the badge man on the grassy knoll. involved in being the stand-in for the backyard photographs where Oswald is holding the rifle, has a gun on his hip, or has newspapers in his hand, depending on which pose you're looking at. This thing falls apart absolutely of its own weight.
Yeah.
Would you guys not agree?
Mm-hmm.
No verifiable evidence. Okay.
And the diary wasn't consistent. You know, when Ricky White came out with the diary, none of it, once again, could be proven.
And who saw it? Here's my question. Who saw it? Because it was taken by the FBI and gone, according to him. So we have his word, basically.
And once again, unfortunately, that's not good enough. It's not good enough for anybody. It's not just Ricky White. It's for all of us. If you're going to make a claim, you have to offer some evidence or at least some logic.
Right. I mean, I've gotten frustrated at certain points and even said, why don't you just make me one of the grassy knoll shooters? It doesn't matter. I would need a time machine because I was born 9 years later. But go ahead. Put me in there because it'll make more sense than what you're saying. You know, I've said this to people who have said this kind of stuff to me. Well, I think Ricky White was telling the truth. Based on what?
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay.
So,
the Federal Reserve.
Executive Order number 11110, which is an order which does effectively turn back over to the Secretary of the Treasury the power to control the amount of these silver certificates that were in circulation, which are actually U.S. notes. They were produced long after Kennedy's assassination, despite the assertions of others that say that they were stopped immediately after. They were produced long before he took office and therefore are completely irrelevant. But the executive order that they point to, they completely misread and misunderstand. So give that one up. Was he in battle with the Federal Reserve? Possibly, but you know what? That evidence has yet to completely surface. Pointing to this executive order is just, well, gee, the term red herring comes to mind. You guys disagree with me on any of that?
No.
Yeah, no, I was just going to add that, and the board members of the Reserve serve for longer terms than presidents. Presidents don't matter to the board members of the Federal Reserve. They're going to be there after they're gone.
Good point. Very good.
Okay. E. Howard Hunt.
Oof. You want that one, Rob?
Sure. His deathbed confession, I guess, is what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, he led a very interesting life. And, of course, up to the end when he implicated LBJ, Cordmeyer, David Morales, William Harvey, people of this nature in the assassination of JFK. But the question then becomes, okay, are you CIA till your last dying breath? Or do you do it? Are you doing a favor for your children and your family still here? I'm not really sure the exact motivation, behind this. And, as we've discussed here tonight, there's just not a whole lot of corroborating evidence of LBJ being, at the top of this food chain. Now granted, William Harvey and Morales may have been involved at some point. But other than that, I don't think we can put much credence in his confession.
I agree. Yeah,
right.
I think Harvey's a rational idea as a feasible person, if not at least someone in the mold of Harvey. But Harvey has such deep connections to actually hiring assassins that were actually active during 1963, perhaps not in the United States, but still active. And then he came up with ZR rifle, makes sense. So I think that was maybe Hunt's little bit of truth or, feasibility in his idea. But the rest, is just a conglomeration of people that have always been touted as somehow being involved with no evidence.
Right, and this is what the problem is, honestly, with every single one of these theories. And what else do we have on the list, Carmine?
The Mauser.
Oof. All right.
You want me to do a quick one? Unless you want to.
Yeah, do a quick explanation of why it is this the alleged other guns. There's a possibility that there were other guns, true, but what do we have there regarding the Mauser, Carmine?
Basically, a couple of police officers in the DPD claimed that they saw and identified the weapon originally as a Mauser. And this was later disproven. It was proven to be a Carcano based on the Alea film, which was taken shortly after the discovery, once they did an up-close inspection of the rifle, and once it was brought and presented to everyone. Now, researcher and attorney Mark Lane claimed that it was in fact a Mauser, that he had Roger Craig and other, that even though the other members of the DPD had never had rescinded what they said and corrected, the description, that Roger Craig was one member of the Sheriff's Department who wouldn't and said it was a Mauser still. Now, Lane claimed that the Mauser was in a document, and I actually went and found the CIA document it's in. Unfortunately, the only thing that has to do with the Mauser in the document is the word Mauser. They couldn't even give the street Kennedy was killed on. They weren't informed. They didn't have a clear line of information. They were basically putting together any facts they possibly could, and they said the word Mauser because originally it was Mauser. That was actually telecast, and Wade pointed at his head and said Mauser originally. But that was misinformation. And ever since then, people have grappled to try to say it was in fact a Mauser, but there's no ballistics evidence of a Mauser. There was no Mauser found at the scene. So it's taking a mistaken document and taking people who had an initial impression and trying to make that the key to the entire assassination.
Right, and actually a weapon that was seized contemporaneous with the assassination was an Enfield, but it was seized miles away from the scene by a traffic cop who stopped somebody.
Yeah, there was also mention of a Japanese... I'm sorry, Chuck.
No, go ahead. There was also the mention of the Japanese rifle. Go ahead.
Yeah, the mention of the Japanese rifle, that might have been a miscommunication based on the scope being Japanese.
Right. And, of course, if you look at the DPD files, you will find that there was a mention of a Mauser, but even the officers responsible for that, like Boone, later corrected themselves and basically said, look, I didn't understand the weapon very well. And in this case, I will tend to believe them.
Yeah.
Because mistakes like that, I think it was nothing more than a mistake, a miscommunication, and the overzealous nature of the media at the time. So, that's about that for the Mauser. What else do we got on the list?
And now we can go to, we have three things left. Two things left. That we already covered the LBJ. Oswald's definite guilt or innocence without evidence, and Saul and QK enchant.
Okay, well, Oswald's guilt, with or without evidence, is something that I think we could do a separate show on.
Oh, yeah.
But I'll tell you what, let's get into QK enchant really quickly, because this is a recent article that you put out about it, and I'd like you to talk about it a bit.
Oh, okay.
We only have about, say 6-7 minutes here where you got to work with, but see what you can do with it.
Okay, QK Enchant was an agency program where they gave out security. They gave out security clearances to businessmen and other people in the private sector that could be of use for an agency relationship.
Right.
Now,
part of the mechanism for information collection, for intelligence collection, they utilize business assets like, guess what, our friend Clay Shaw and other people, and I contend even at that time George H.W. Bush would have been a likely candidate for this.
Yeah, that's not outside of the realm of possibility. And that's, because at that time, too, Bush wouldn't have been a high-level member of any, that might have been his doorway to the agency.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason he was likely not involved in any of these things is because he wouldn't have been a high-level member at the time. He was a no one as far as the CIA was concerned.
Right. And go ahead.
Well, among QK Enchant's members were feasibly one of Clay Shaw's attorneys, and J. Monroe Sullivan was an unwitting member of QK Enchant, who was the person who said he was with Clay Shaw on November 22nd, 1963 in San Francisco. So it's not outside the realm of possibility that Garrison believed Shaw was associated, because there were other people that were associated in the business realm. Now, one of the people who was associated with QK Enchant was Hugh McDonald, and he later claimed to know the identity of the president's assassin and named him Saul, which you'll find in a lot of JFK literature over the years, that name, and that it later got attached to the Mexico City Mystery Man as being one of the assassins. So that's the evolution of that particular myth. McDonald was used for QK Enchant, but he wasn't unwitting, so he feasibly knew that he was providing information to the Central Intelligence Agency. So he either tried to monetize off of that, perhaps, or he decided he was going to feed into the disinformation and create his own story and see how famous he could make it.
Right, and he might have even been directed to do so.
Yeah.
That's all speculation, but the idea that he was immediately connected to this program tends to make you wonder about it, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Anybody that has a connection directly to the CIA.
Right. Rob, did you want to say something about that?
I've read that book, and at the time I read it, it's an interesting book. It's kind of a narrative story type book. Not a lot of facts and evidence in it, but one thing that did intrigue me about what he said about where Saul was located was in the second floor of the county records building. And in several frames, and don't hold me to this, I think it's the Bell film. It could be another film. But you can see gunfire from the second floor of the county records building as the limo turns the corner. So I always thought that was interesting. But, this guy was a really decorated police officer. He's former military. He created the identikit, which was used to create composite sketches of suspects. So, it's hard to say what his motives were, if he was making something up or if it's some kind of legit story he got railroaded on or
he could have been tricked. He might be innocent and they could have just spun a tale for him and he decided to go with it.
Well, and see, that's the theme here. I think that every single one of the different topics that we've covered tonight is absolutely consistent with one another in this particular aspect, and that is that some of the plausible, some of the feasible, and some of the realistic, and even sometimes a little bit of real information sprinkled on top, is mixed with enough bull to keep people busy.
Yep, and
That's
guessing.
all there is. And guessing, exactly. And guessing is not how you solve any crime. Might be part of the process, but not without a foundation. And that foundation, once again, ladies and gentlemen, is a little pesky thing called, I say this word a lot. Thank you, Carmine. You got me saying it all the time. Yes. Evidence. This is what you require if you want to even begin to spin one of these tales, and I advise that you don't spin a tale. You actually examine the evidence and create a coherent, plausible explanation for anything and everything you examine. Like I said, we covered the JFK assassination tonight, but think about it. The same process could be used in many different aspects of interest in one's life and lifetime. So I want to thank Carmine Savastano, the author of Two Princes and a King, and also the main man at Neapolis Media Group, which all three of us are actually part of. Rob Clark, who is the Lone Gunman podcast. That is his thing at tlgpodcast.com. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay, I got the website right this time. tlgpodcast.com, but you can also find him on Spreaker. And you know what? You can find all three of us on Facebook if you want to ask us reasonable questions or whatever, or if you want to try and dispel some of the things that you think you've been misled by. I'll tell you what, though. Let me give the last few fleeting moments here to you guys to speak. I don't know, Rob, first, if there's anything you want to say in closing here.
Yeah, I'd just like to say thank you for having us on to do this again, Chuck. I think it's important that people realize that there's a difference between conspiracy buffs and conspiracy researchers. And don't get it twisted. Conspiracy researchers will try to debunk other conspiracies as well. It's just part of the natural evolution of things. And I think it's inherent in us to kind of clean up the mess that others have made so we can actually move forward, in research. And hopefully we've sparked the interest of a bunch of other people here tonight to do the same thing. Demand evidence.
Absolutely. Carmine, anything you want to kind of close out with?
Yeah, I'd also like to tell everyone, too, that, we're not saying that we have all the answers. We're just saying that the answers can only be found by rationally assessing the evidence and comparing it to what we know to be verifiable. You know, it's not. We're going to have to make. You're going to have to speculate sometimes, and we're all going to make mistakes sometimes. You know, we're all going to see evidence that doesn't necessarily agree with another piece of evidence and have to make a decision logically and based on all of the outside evidence we can bring into that decision on what is the most feasible. And sometimes we're going to be wrong, but we have to be willing to admit we're wrong and not be these myth makers who just go on for decades spouting the same wrong ideas that have been disproven already. They're just spinning their wheels. And as I think we need to realign credible researchers from all sides against these myth makers.
Absolutely. Once again, I want to thank everybody who listened to the Ochelli Effect tonight. This was the JFK Myths episode, and I hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned to American Freedom Radio at AmericanFreedomRadio.com. Have a good night, everybody.
News and information you can trust. This is American Freedom Radio. Freedom, American Freedom Radio. American Freedom Radio.
Nutritious food is real body armor. It builds muscle, burns fat, improves digestion, and feeds the entire body the nutrients it needs. Did you know the U.S. government banned the hemp plant from growing in the United States and classified it as a Schedule I drug to hide it behind the marijuana plant? People have been confused about this plant for over 80 years, and many still don't know what hemp is. So now you know hemp is not marijuana, and marijuana is not hemp. They are different varieties of the same species. HempUSA.org wants the world to know these basic facts and to help people understand that hemp protein powder is the best-kept health secret you need to know about. Remember, hemp protein powder contains 53% protein, is gluten-free, anti-inflammatory, non-GMO, and is loaded with nutrients. Call 888-910-4367, 888-910-4367, and see what our powder, seeds, and oil can do for you. Only at HempUSA.org.
What kind of person are you? How do you see yourself? Are you the kind of person that lets everyone else do all the work, just hoping that you'll be able to get some of the crumbs that fall from the table? Or are you the kind of person that rolls up their sleeves and does the dirty jobs that no one else wants to do? Are you hoping that all the activists giving their blood, sweat, and tears to serve humanity are going to solve all the world's problems? Or are you just wondering, is there something simple I can do to contribute? Yes, there is. Help us. Help us do what we do. Partner up with American Freedom Radio today by gifting a regular amount to support the network and your favorite hosts, bringing you less commercials and more information. Go to AmericanFreedomRadio.com and start donating today from between $1 and $100 per month, according to the kind of person you are. Thank you very much for your support.
We are living in a new era. Partnerships are more important than profit, and gratitude is more respected than greed. As the millennial generation evolves the corporate landscape, our company aims to maximize the achievements of CBD application and push the limits of what's possible by 2020. Our core product matrix and careful cannabidiol purification process are uniquely designed to be privately made in different regions of the world and is geared to assist the efforts of different nations to change the landscape of various pain-related healthcare costs, epilepsy and autism, rising mental disorders, and even soldier suicides. Crystal Pure CBD is made with the industry's finest 99.9% pure CBD crystals. No paste, no filler. Our solution is a permanent answer, and it saves you over 1/3 in cost. Crystal Pure CBD. Come join us.
You're listening to AmericanFreedomRadio.com, the network who perseveres in delivering intelligent debate, constructive dialogue with true independence. The freedom to broadcast the truth is not free at all. So what is American Freedom Radio worth to you? The empowering information with fun, honest and pure integrity behind it provides an example to follow. Friendships to flourish with the moral altruism that pulls no punches. The hosts sacrifice and show remarkable discipline in their duty to deliver quality radio in service to the community with strength, wisdom and loyalty. The founders of AFR wish to thank you personally for sharing your views and insights to make the best radio and alternative media. Now it's time for you to give something back and play a vital role in the future of America. Be as generous with us as we've been with you. Click on the donate banner at AmericanFreedomRadio.com or volunteer by emailing AmericanFreedomRadio.com. Vaccine, psychotropic drugs and artillery batteries not included.
No rules, no rules, no taboo topics, no taboo topics, no fear of doom, no fear of doom. We are American Freedom Radio, American Freedom Radio.